Now, we want to have more of your tips on world survival, please, but because we're not so... Well, we don't have a huge amount of faith or trust in the government. We've got our own survival expert on the phone, Carl Legge from Cambrian Survival. He hails from one of the harshest climates in the world, West Wales. Hi, Carl. How are you?
Hi, how are you doing? I'm fine.
Carl, I mean, I know we're speaking hypothetically, but in the face of an emergency, how do people react? Is it absolute panic and terror?
It varies depending on what training people have and what their general attitude to life is. So some will stop and think and be calm about it, and other people do go into meltdown, especially if they haven't thought about it or had a chance to prepare.
Now, we'd like to go into different scenarios because we'd like to be prepared, as the Scout motto says. But in general, when something life-threatening happens, what's the first thing you should do?
Stop. So if there's something that's an immediate attack on you, or you're immediately in danger, you're getting burnt or attacked, is obviously to remove yourself from it. But then to stop, think, look about what's around you, and then plan your next steps. The fight or flight response that you get when you get that surge of adrenaline is very useful for running away from the immediate danger, but it does funny things to your body chemistry and means that actually calm action and considered and planned action is much more difficult to take.
It's kind of an old tradition that was there, that women and children were the most important in these situations. Does this still hold?
Well, it's still I suppose a convention that people have to deal with women and children first. That obviously getting your young ones out of the way or out of danger is a good thing because they're in less position to help themselves. But I should say that a lot of the women that I know work with, I would trust and work with them as well as any bloke. So I'm not sure I'd be that patronising.
I always thought it was because if we got through this disaster, you know, we would be the only ones, obviously with the help of a man, who could continue on the human race.
Yes, that's an interesting thought. But I suppose if you're in a car crash or you're in an accident at sea, the procreation and survival of the species is probably less at risk, isn't it?
Absolutely. So tell us we'll throw a hypothetical situation. Major flooding. Major flooding, as the likes of which we've seen New Orleans in the past couple of years, or even worse, tsunami time. Yeah. What do we do?
Okay. For something like floods, the pre-preparation is important. So if you know you're in a high-risk area, you should have thought through the situation beforehand, so that you have, in the case, obviously in England there's a lot of flooding going on at the moment in parts of Wales. Mm-hmm. People in those situations should have thought through before and taken the necessary steps to protect their property, in terms of sandbags, in terms of having their house constructed so that the electricity switches and things are actually above the flood line. So that's the sort of thing you can do in advance. If the flood actually happens and it's worse and the property is no longer safe to stay in, again, you should have thought about that and have what in some places is called a bug-out bag. So you have everything that is essential to keep you safe and well until rescue is able to arrive. So you see people being lifted off of rooftops by helicopters, for example. So if you had a sudden flood and that happened, they would need to have something with them that would enable them to stay warm, so that they could feed themselves, to keep blood sugars up, and so that they keep safe and able to make good decisions like that until rescue can arrive. But the most important thing is that pre-planning and the thinking through of the scenario and what might happen.
So back in wartime, a lot of people had shelter. You remember even in The Wizard of Oz, they all ran to their shelter when a hurricane was coming. I know we don't really build them now, but should we have one? Do you have one at your house?
What, in the case of high winds or things? No.
For anything, that you could just head down to the bunker down the back of the garden.
No, I don't. And I'd be interested to think of the number of scenarios where that would actually be something that was helpful.
Well, what about, say, a nuclear accident where nuclear elements were all over the atmosphere, and if we had something that was completely shielded with metal and we all went down, when everything passed, could we come back out and start all over again?
Well, it's interesting because I was listening to your program before I came on, and I thought, well, in the case of either nuclear war or a nuclear accident, then really the survivability of many people is actually a very difficult thing to do. So the proportionality of having a completely sealed shelter in every house so that people could survive, I don't think works. And in any event, when you come out, depending on how close you are to where the accident or the bomb landed, you've got an environment that's extremely harsh in any event. So, thinking about survivability in those extreme circumstances is actually very difficult. There is very little that can be done in those sort of circumstances.
It's a bit doom and gloom, isn't it? There's got to be some way. We got to make it somehow.
Go home, get drunk, forget about it.
If there was a nuclear bomb and there was a bomb shelter that managed to survive, you might have nuclear type of a suit that could protect you. You might make it all the way to wherever it wasn't bombed.
It can, but you'll find, for example, the American forces and the UK forces in Iraq, when they first went in there, have suits to protect them, but those suits don't last forever. And once they've had a certain number of exposures, their effectiveness degrades in any event. So what the soldiers are thinking of doing there is protecting themselves for a series of short-term intervals. And what would happen is they'd actually be taken, once they had that attack, the idea would be to take them away from the front line.
So, Carl, how helpful would the iodine tablets be?
Well, they may help specific symptoms, but as I think one of your callers or texters said earlier, they protect against specific things, and there's all sorts of other stuff going on. So, your water wouldn't be safe to drink. Plants wouldn't be safe to eat, and so you can do without water for 3 days. But once that 3 days has gone, you're going to need the water. So the iodine tablets will help, and there might be some psychological benefit, but there's going to be other things happening in your world that are going to be threats later on.
Wait a minute, Carl. This doesn't sound right at all. You're saying that our government spend a fortune of money on a plan that isn't going to work, that just doesn't fit with what we've been looking at in the government the last while.
I'm in the happy position being here in Wales and not knowing enough about what the Irish government has done.
For you, I'll let you know that was an entirely sarcastic remark. That just sounds exactly what they do. Okay, what about the situation of an avalanche? Because it's ski time, ski season. Yep. Some people might be snowboarding, skiing. Yep. You're skiing off piste. You're being a bit irresponsible. You haven't got a guide with you, and something happens, an avalanche happens. What do you do? What's the first thing you do? If you hear the noise and you see the snow comes, there's nothing you can do. What do you do?
Right, well, you've painted a scenario.
Hi, how are you doing this morning?
Sorry about that.
Thank you very much.
Sorry about that. Continue.
Okay. You've painted a scenario there where you've ignored some of your pre-planning. Okay, so you've put yourself in a risk situation. So ideally, you wouldn't be there in the first place. You said earlier about putting your hands over your head. What you need to be able to do is to protect your airway. So doing what you did is fine. And as the avalanche is coming over, the idea would be, if you can and you know which way is up, to swim towards the top. You can also have protection with you in terms of probes or things that you can push upwards, one to make an air hole and also so that you can be identified. You can carry beacons on you so that you can be quickly found by rescuers in the case that there's an avalanche as well.
We're asking people, Carl, what would they do if they had 24 hours left on the planet? What would you do?
I would get myself home to my loved ones here and have the biggest party I could do with that was around me.
Sounds very sensible, as all of the advice you've given us. It sounds like preparation is key. Carl Legge from Cambrian Survival in Wales. Thanks so much for joining us. Cheers.
Pleasure.
The Spin with Claire McKenna and Jonathan McRae on Spin 103.8.